Okay, so that's another one. Okay. Man, it's gonna be so confusing for people. Okay, back to the live stuff. There we go. Okay. Excellent connection. Perfect. Analytics, don't need that. Stream health. Perfect. Okay, so I didn't have time to change that. So this one is now with normal latency instead of ultra low latency. I don't think that should really make much of a difference, but yeah. Okay. Welcome everyone once again. I'm gonna attempt to stream again, and we'll see if I can make it past 10 minutes today. Hopefully no drop in internet. It's looking like everything is good with the stream health. Good connection, everything's great. Okay, perfect. Well, welcome to the stream. This is our 4th Black Friday stream, right? We'll be streaming all week and until I guess we finish our Black Friday sale, which wraps up on the 29th, Tuesday, after Cyber Monday and stuff, which is very exciting. So if there's anything you've been eyeing on FlippedNormals, now is the time to go pick it up. We have over 20,000 products that are 50% off currently. Okay, let's get started. So, I should probably open my reference. So, like yesterday, if anyone remembers, I was going to sculpt an alien from Mass Effect. And I'm going with a prothean from Mass Effect. So I'm just going to start by just blocking out some things. And while I'm sculpting, Henning is going to attend the chat and answer all of your questions. Oh yeah, get it out on the World Wide Web. Actually, let me just close my door. One sec. Oh yeah. It's been a while since I sculpted. At least it's not as bad as before I created the Souls, or I shouldn't call it the Souls tutorial because that's not what it's called anymore. It's creating a full character in ZBrush tutorial, right? That's what we're going with. Before that, I think it was the Majora piece that I did, if I'm remembering correctly, and between the Majora sculpt and the Souls sculpt, I don't know, that was like a full year, pretty much. I mean, that's brutal. You are muted? Oh, that's that. Yeah, you are. There you go. You are now unmuted.
Hey, have I been now unmuted?
You have.
Morten didn't think I was worth listening to, so.
Okay, so let's see here.
Yes, if you guys can just confirm that you can hear me properly now, that would be swell.
Yeah. So I was doing some stream tests before, and I thought there was no reason to have my desktop audio be on the stream tests in case it actually went live. Don't question what I was watching.
What do you think are some of the most useful features in ZBrush, but not everyone knows about it, Morten?
The most useful? Oh, that's a good question. You say something first, and let's see if I can get inspired by that.
All right. Probably some boring technical things. It's one of those things that if you don't know, but it's going to just cause you tons of issues. If you merge subtools together, you need to have the UV button enabled. Otherwise, the UVs are just gone, and then you'd wasted hours if you discover it later on. And then another boring one is you need to be sure that if you export particularly into Maya, you have to just disable polygroups. Not an obvious one at all. One cool one people actually, I'm not actually sure people know about is UV Master. UV Master is a brilliant plugin for doing UVs. You can do stuff super quickly. Either you have pre-selected seams from other software, or you can have just straight up just paint where you want to preserve edges and where you want to attract edges, and then you get quick UVs for that. So UV Master is really cool. Another one as well, which is people know about it, but it's you don't necessarily know how to use it. It's a decimation master. It's not just that you can decimate things so you can retopologize it. You can use decimation master for final renders, where obviously if you want to deform it, you can't do that. But if you are just using it for a still image, like with this guy Morten is sculpting now, you could most definitely use decimation master, bring him into Blender, and then you could, or any other render engine, and then you could just render them there. There's no reason to have UVs and proper topology and all that kind of stuff if you're just doing stuff for rendering. We will use this all the time production if you have to show work in progress of your character. It's a real, like particularly VFX, it's a real pain to actually get stuff set up for just a turntable render. You have to import into your software and all that, or you can just decimate it and just hit render. It's much easier.
I'm trying to think if there's like a one really cool feature that I use. I honestly think one of the best things for me, we mentioned that yesterday as well, is the multi subtool transform that's in here now. I can't really do it because I don't have multiple subtools, but essentially, yeah, you can transport all selected subtools with this button. I shouldn't call it the new gizmo because it's not new at all anymore.
No,
it's like, yeah, it's a lot of years old now. But that would probably be it for me.
Anything after like 2012 and ZBrush is kind of a new feature for me.
That's actually something interesting. It's like a lot of the time I see the majority of people now use the gizmo to transform. But for me, I actually still use the transpose lines quite a lot. I don't know, maybe it's because that's what I started with, but for a lot of the time, drawing out like a line or something for rotation, I feel like that transpose lines just give me a lot of nice control.
Particularly on a pose something as well, then you pretty much need the transpose tool, the good old scroll one. What feature would you like to see in ZBrush, like subfolders? For me, this is one of more like structural things which can open up an explosion for new features in ZBrush, which is never ever going to happen. It's Python support, because currently if you want to build custom tools in ZBrush, you really cannot do that. You can do it like C scripting, and there are new things coming out like Pixologic are making themselves, but like if you had Python support, this would just create an explosion of tools, but probably never going to happen. So
I mean, with Maxon taking over, that could be interesting. But the core team of Pixologic or from Pixologic is probably still the same, so probably not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you excited about ZBrush getting Redshift as a render engine? I didn't know ZBrush was getting Redshift as a render engine.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, though only in subscription apparently. I mean, that might have been something that they announced during ZBrush Summit. Haven't heard about that. Okay. Redshift is insanely powerful. It's one of the engines I haven't really used a lot, but from what I've seen and read and from other people are really loving Redshift, which I believe was acquired by Maxon some years ago as well.
Oh, okay. They've just been on a buying spree.
Yeah. Have you tried using the 3D controller from 3D Connection? I'm still trying to get used to it, but so far it's reduced to things I have to do with my drawing hand. Yeah, it's a really cool one. I actually have one. I gave it to my brother who's doing engineering, and he uses it all the time now. I don't personally use it. I don't really find it to be very useful for my use case, but I know a lot of people really like the 3D Connection. Basically, if people don't know, it's basically just like a thing you have on your desktop, and you just rotate around in 3D based on that. It's a bit like a joystick, and it means that you can you can do things in terms of navigation that's actually impossible to do otherwise, because you have like more dimensions for it. So in 3D, you can basically only pan or like, pan around. You can zoom, or you can like rotate. And with 3D connection, you can do all at the same time, which is really cool. So you can really get in there. But no, not something I've been using myself.
That's interesting, because I remember when they started, becoming more and more popular, and they were even around when, not when we started doing 3D, but fairly soon after, I feel like.
Maybe I bought mine in 2009.
Yeah.
And that one still works really well. It's like a heavy, chunky guy. It's really cool. I think there is support for it in ZBrush as well now.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is pretty handy.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to try one. I'm probably not gonna buy one to test it out, but if there was one I could try out, that would be interesting. So right now I'm just kind of doodling around, figuring out the main shapes that I want to have present in here.
Yeah, what are you thinking about when you're sculpting? Like, do you have like a foundational way of thinking about it, or are you kind of just noodling around and seeing what happens?
Kind of just noodling around and seeing what happens right now. But basing it off of, just I guess core anatomy stuff, and one of the things that I struggle with, I feel like a lot, is just having a head by itself makes it hard for me to figure out what the character is gonna look like, the stature of the character. So that often I'll add something like a body like this, just so it gives me more of an idea of, is he a scrawny looking alien, or is like a buff guy, or what's going on with him. But at the moment, just looking at the prothean and seeing what I think works in him, maybe what doesn't, take some inspiration from that, try to change things. But honestly, it's kind of like I wouldn't say it's like an autopilot thing right now, but it's more mindless. It's more just kind of doodling more than anything.
I think this goes into something we've been talking about over the last few days over the stream as well, that if you learn anatomy to a level where it becomes intuitive, then you can doodle around. Like now, what I'm seeing now, probably not doing this live. You're doing the sternocleidomastoid for that. Probably doing something else, but it just means you can just kind of intuitively go in and do that. And the more you know about anatomy, the more you can internalize, the easier it becomes to sculpt creative characters. Just because you don't have to like look things up, like when you're sculpting a neck like this, you don't have to actually look into anatomical reference, and it just means you can spend your time designing instead of looking things up all the time. It will break the flow quite a lot if you constantly had to look up all the muscles. Like if currently what you have, if you had to look up the bones and the muscles for this, that would just be impossible. It would take you 4 times as long, and it would not look good at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, the more comfortable you get with an anatomy like that, the more you can have fun with it. Obviously, I'm not like a master or anything, but it's just, I guess you get to a point where you start to develop shorthand for some things that you can then sort of speed up your workflow a little bit.
Here's an interesting question, actually. Was there anything that took you by surprise for entering the industry? Could be positive or negative. Yeah, one thing that actually surprised me, like I want to make sure I phrase this in the correct way, but the impression I had from, I've been on social media for a few years before I joined the industry. The impression I had there was that the people who are in the industry are the absolute most god tier artists in the world. And while of course there are some absolutely insane artists working at the major studios, it's not like everyone who works at like a VFX studio or a regular studio is like of an absolutely insane caliber who can just whip stuff up in like 10 seconds. Instead, what it is, it's a collection of people who are solid at what they're doing. They know the tools, they know how to work in a production, but it's not necessarily that they're all like Rafael Grassetti level at sculpting. Which is an interesting one, because that was kind of my assumption, that everyone who works there, they're they're just going to completely kick your ass. But then people are good at what they're doing, but it's more like it's manageable to get into the industry. You have to be professional in what you do. You need to have a reel that shows that you can do the work there. But once they can see that, yeah, this person can do the work we need to do, then you should be able to fit into a production. So that was like one of the things I was surprised about. Not like positive, negative, more like a, oh yeah, that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, it's my same thing for me there. I think one of the things that genuinely surprised me was the money. It's funny because I hadn't thought about making money, like actually making money, getting a salary, until the day that I started applying for, in that case, there was internships, but I got a paid internship. And once we started talking about that, it was like, oh yeah, of course you can make a living off of this. That makes sense. I don't know. I just never connected the two, that's something that I loved to do like that, something that was a passion of mine, could actually be used to make a living.
Yeah, I had exactly the same thing. Where it was like, oh, so what are your salary expectations? Oh, right, yeah, you draw a salary at a job, right?
Exactly.
Here's a good question from SD Canal asking, how do you sculpt a character in which you only have one reference for and you can't see their back? There are kind of two ways. You either find some equivalent reference for their back, like if you're trying to sculpt, like let's say you have a character like Morten is sculpting now, and you don't have any kind of reference, you only have the front view. You try to find something that is the closest in terms of anatomy, or like preferably some kind of scan or something. But if it's for some kind of character, you just have to find something equivalent, or you just have to make it up. Like if you truly can't find anything, you'll just have to do your best to see that. I've been working with some students where they've been doing that. They've been gathering reference only from the front of the torso, and the front of the torso looked great, and the back of the torso did not look great. And that was because they only had a reference from the front. So try to always find reference like that. But yeah, there isn't really like a magical solution there. Either you find reference for it, or you just kind of make it up. Yeah, Andre is saying that I call it the exploration phase instead of like just doodling around. It is more of an actual, you're exploring, right?
Exactly.
I'm not sure what you're exactly doing now, Morten, on screen. Again, the delay, but like you just, for what I'm saying now, you just were doing the like the olecranon and the epicondyles on the back of the on the arm, basically the elbow. And I find that to be really useful whenever I'm sculpting as well. Like get in some of the main bony landmarks, like get in the elbow in there. Like on the elbow, you basically have like 3 bumps. You have the one from the ulna, which is just like just this, and then you have like 2 little guys here. See if you can see it on the camera now. So you have this one here, and this keeps moving, and then you have 2 little notches here. And if you get these 3 notches in, just pointy bits basically, called fancy Latin names, but if you can get these in, then doing the arm is going to be much easier. It means you can get in the tricep in an easier way. It means you can get in the flexors and the extenders as well, much easier. So getting in the bones is really handy. It's not just like hand to get in the bones, like it's pretty essential to get in the bones. Like you need to get in the bones. The way I think about bones is that they determine really everything. Like whenever I'm teaching it, I'm simplifying it into like the 4 stages. And anyone who's watched one of our latest tutorials will know that, it's the bones, muscle, fat, and skin. But the first stage is kind of like, you can have one before that, the 0 stage, which is just proportion. And this is where you can just get in the main volumes of the general things. But proportion is really a result of all the various ones. If you think about like the bones determine the height, and the height of the character, the length, the width of the character in a very large way. If you took like the mountain from Game of Thrones, but you made his spine like half the size, he would not be a particularly tall man. He would just be slightly above average, probably, because he's a giant. So if you were to do that, you change the proportions. So you do get proportion by doing the bone, muscle, fat, and skin. But the You can also get started just if you've internalized all the anatomy before, and if that becomes intuitive, you can also just kind of get started and explore. Oh, hey, Matthias is here. Hey, Matthias. Matthias is a fantastic rigger, so whatever he says in the chat, just listen to him.
Whatever it's about. Doesn't
Whatever
matter if it's
about.
rigging or not. It's just whatever.
Yes.
Yes, this isn't actually sort of what I planned to do, but then this is kind of what I wanted to do. Just building up something more. Like, it's probably not going to be as refined as what you've seen the past couple days face-wise from Henning, but you know, I just wanted to play around some and have something for you guys to look at while Henning answers questions.
This is a really solid, good question, and it's very hard to answer. I know it's too broad to say, but do you think stylized artists are more hireable than other creature artists? It's a tricky one. We had one of these the other day. Like, do you think stylized is more hireable than realism for characters and creatures? And honestly, I truly don't know that one. In order to see that one, I guess you would have to survey the entire industry, both like in film, for instance, you basically have the two areas. You have the VFX area, and then you have the animation side, with Disney and Pixar. And then in games, you have realism, which will be often like full-on AAA games, and then you have more like stylized games as well. And it's really hard to answer whether it's easier to get hired as a stylized artist or a realistic artist. If somebody has experience with that, please share your thoughts. But it's definitely not like one is objectively easier than the other, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my guess would be that it always depends on demand at the time and their experience level, and yeah, I think that's a hard one to sort of to just answer.
Yeah, I think if you're solid at either, you're going to be employed, at least if you're flexible in maybe location and such. So I think you really just have to pick which one you enjoy and then go from there. Is there anything you'd like to see on an art piece or somebody's portfolio that would make you look through it more? It's a good question. When it depends on what kind of portfolio it is. If you have a portfolio, just a collection of all the work you've ever done, then it's more like, oh, I'm looking at it to just see some cool art. But if I'm looking at it to review portfolios, then I'm looking at it with a very different eyes. I'm not just looking at it from a, oh, this is cool art or not. You can have cool art that's entirely useless in terms of any kind of hireability, and you can have stuff that's very hireable that doesn't necessarily look cool. So if I'm looking at it from a hireable point of view, then it would be, are the pieces made to be used in a production? Meaning if you have a character, Morten sculpted characters now, so if you have something like that, are you showing wireframes? Are you showing an understanding of figure sculpting? Are you showing appealing shapes and all that? So it's really about that. In that case, can you be used in the job that you want to be hired for? And this is something I deal a lot with students, that they're building their portfolios. And a big issue, we've been talking about this before, but probably one of the biggest issues to see with portfolios is that at the end of your 3 years of university, you just take whatever stuff you've done for like throughout all of uni, and you just kind of put it in your portfolio. And then you maybe improve them a little bit here and there, but you're left now with a portfolio that has maybe like 10 pieces, and the quality is all over the place.
Yeah.
And what I think is a much better approach is do the opposite. Instead of just collecting the best stuff you have, figure out what you want in your portfolio. Maybe like if you're in uni, like you're starting your third year, you have a whole year to build a portfolio. Or if you're not in uni, you're just trying to build a portfolio afterwards. Talk to somebody professional and figure out what do they recommend it to build. Usually like something like 3-4 pieces is plenty. And then you build based on that. That's going to be really beneficial, because that means you can scope out the work and you can treat it as a proper project instead of just putting together whatever you have. And that means you can also think about it in a more holistic way, instead of just doing like 4 different kind of characters, or like, oh, it's a lighting project from first year of uni, and then you have like some anatomy from last year, and then you have some like an environment here, which is just going to be a mess, unless you want to be a generalist, of course. Then it's going to be, okay, I want to be a hard surface modeler. Okay, cool. What skills do I need to display as a hard surface modeler? All right, talk to a hard surface artist, and then get a list of what's useful and get a range. Don't just do like 3 cars. Maybe one is an airplane, and then one is a prop that is mixed hard surface and organics. Maybe one is going to be some kind of environment piece. Like, who knows? Whatever it is, you need to just be aware of that. Oh, here's a good one. Emilia is watching. In terms of marketing, how would you suggest new artists approach social media? I think it's useful to just be consistent on social media, but also treat social media as your brand, so that if you're just like shit posting all day long and you're posting like crazy amounts of like political things or like spicy opinions all the time, that doesn't necessarily reflect in a very professional manner. Now, that's totally fine if that's what you want to do, but just be aware that your social media presence does affect people's opinion on you. So basically, you can curate people's opinion about you. So in terms of that, you want to be aware that people hiring you are probably going to check your social media. So just keep that in mind. It's not like everything you do is going to have to be approved by a future employer or something. It's just something to be aware of, that the reality is that if you have a very spicy social media, it may reflect negatively on you. And in terms of work, I recommend posting stuff regularly, but don't just be a slave to the algorithm, because the algorithm keeps changing all the time. Just post your work consistently and ask for feedback about what you're doing. Social media is a tricky one. Yeah, one thing that's really important is just to don't get caught up in the vanity metric game. And vanity metrics would be likes, retweets, shares, whatever it might be on the platform you're at. I've seen this quite often, actually, like on Instagram. You have all these like crazy drawing accounts where I found them recently that it had something like 80,000 followers. Like, that's a fairly large account, particularly for an artist. But the drawings were not very good at all. It was something like you could expect after somebody's been drawing for like 3 months. And they had tons of these videos with a lot of views. So this, if you keep doing that, and you keep doing well on social media, you might assume that you're going to do well professionally. And you might have somebody who's posting solid sculpts, but they're not getting interactions, or solid work in general, but it's just not getting traction. But that person might be incredibly hireable, but the one with 80K followers is not hireable whatsoever. It's very easy if you break out of the little bubble of art, and you go into the more of the mainstream. Now, you know how you're back for vacation or something, and your aunt is like, "Wow, you're super good at drawing." Yeah, but now you just have 50,000 aunts saying that you're good at drawing because it looks impressive. But that you don't have to make sure that you seek validation in terms of your skills, not from vanity metrics like likes or shares or anything like that. The way you evaluate your skills is you can't really do it yourself. You need somebody else to evaluate it. You need somebody who has been doing it for longer than you and has experience and isn't necessarily emotionally connected with you, in a sense that they can just be fully honest and give you a proper review. Just one of the biggest things is be aware of what is a vanity metric and what is not a vanity metric, and don't be a slave to likes. That's going to really destroy your happiness.
It's hard to find someone to trust there as well. Like, it's building that confidence in someone who will actually give you feedback versus your mom who will tell you everything is great. I mean, we've had conversations with people about this before where they've said, "Oh, I don't know, my mom, I really trust my mom. She really gives me really good feedback." But it's like, there might be like a mom out there who does that, but for the most part, people who are close to you like that and probably have been before you even started this, chances are they don't want to hurt your feelings, and they might not be as impartial as someone who's trying to help you in terms of critique.
Yeah, or they legit think that your work is solid, but they just aren't qualified for it. Like it's really tricky when you're learning by yourself. Like I think both Morten and I, we were learning a lot of stuff by ourselves when we were teenagers, basically not in our community, and you don't have anyone around you who knows anything about CG, and then you automatically become the best person in the school or something like that at art, and it's very easy to let that go to your head when in reality your stuff is not super hot. You're just 6 months ahead of everyone else in terms of the art world. So you need to talk to people from outside your little bubble and people who can critically evaluate that. I'm only a Maya user. If the place that I work at suddenly wants me to use Blender instead, what do I do? First off, probably not very likely. More often than not, it's going to be the opposite, that you're a Blender user and now you're being forced to use Maya. If it happens that you really have to switch fast to it, well, I'm going to find a course for you. We have a course on switching to Blender or experienced artists. Basically, people who are, you could of course just brute force it yourself, but we built specifically a course for people who want to switch to Blender really fast, who already knows 3D. You know how when you're starting a 3D software, all the tutorials are beginners tutorials. This is particularly true for Blender, because there's so many beginners, which makes sense. It's a free software, so there's a lot of barrier of entry is significantly lower. So I just posted this now in the chat. So a lot of tutorials for Blender are complete beginner tutorials, meaning, hey, this is how you download Blender, and this is what a polygon is. That's annoying if you want to switch to it. It's more like, all right, cool, I already know how 3D works. Where's my extrude tool? How do I navigate around? Where on earth is my outliner, and how do I render? So
that was primarily the problem we faced when we wanted to switch to Blender. Is like we had to wade through a lot of beginner tutorials to even find like the stuff we were looking for, which was kind of annoying. I think that's also why that course has gotten so popular, because as the demand for Blender has grown, so has the demand for that type of course, because a lot of people are already advanced users and are then looking into Blender, right? So
yeah, it was very frustrating to get started with Blender as somebody who already knows what's going on. Like for me, there were two parts to it. It's that you already have a fair bit of expertise, so you know how something is supposed to work. So there were a fair few tutorials who just showed you the wrong way of approaching it. Like they've been using Blender for a very long time, and they know every single in and out of it, but they don't actually know how to model things. So a lot of the modeling tutorials were just showing you things that were not correct. They were not good modeling conventions. And then it was just the fact that the information was scattered absolutely everywhere. That is really frustrating, that you just have to Google stuff every single day. So when I was learning Blender, like we were in Japan and 2.8 had just come out, and I was making a course on that in the future, and I was just spending like one day, I'm going to learn the UV tools. Next day, I'm going to learn the modeling tools, and just like properly brute forcing it like that. And it meant I learned it really fast. And I, by reading documentation as well, learned all the little secrets here and there. But it was very frustrating. So we just made a course for that.
I mean, you have a very methodical approach. Like you go through like the documentation and everything. So you actually, you pick up a lot of stuff that the normal user who's learning might not pick up. I say normal user, I mean, it's me as well. I don't go through documentation. I just don't have the patience for that. But then that helps, because if there's something modeling wise in Blender that I don't have a clue about, I can always ask you, and you're like, oh yeah, I went through that.
Yeah, the advantage of going through documentation, I always recommend people do it. It's boring as hell, but it's really useful, because it means that you're going to know things a lot of users don't know, because or there is a hidden hotkey here and there, just makes something much easier. So that's very useful to know. Here's a good one. What courses would you recommend for Blender by Aurora? Before that, what do you want to learn in Blender? Blender is a big software, so what do you want to know? Let me know, and we can find some courses for you. This is an excellent question. This is one for you, Morten. Do I need to learn to draw before I sculpt?
No.
Just no.
No, that's it. No, you don't, but it can be useful, I will say. It's interesting. I think there was a question that sort of like just the opposite yesterday. Do I need to be able to sculpt in 3D to draw better in 2D? And I think they're skills that complement each other, but the thing that complements them is it's the observation thing. It's not so much the practical skill of learning how to sculpt or learning how to draw. That's just learning how to make your hand move in a different way. But the observation skill is kind of the same, and you get that with both of those skills, but you tend to work on it in a little bit different, a little bit differently, depending on if it's on paper or if it's on in 3D space. So for a lot of people, obviously, paper can be more manageable because you don't have that extra dimension of being able to rotate your subject around. But at the same time, it can be sometimes tricky to figure out that third dimension on paper as well. That's what I would say.
Yeah, for me, it's basically the same there. The way you can figure out, do you need to know to draw before you sculpt, that's not true, is that you have plenty of people who are excellent at sculpting who can't draw. If it was true, there would be no artist out there who will be good at sculpting without drawing. It's really like a foundational thing. If you get a figure drawing, it's going to help your figure sculpting, but it's not because you're good necessarily at capturing like you're good with pencils or charcoal or something. It's because then you're good at understand proportion, and you understand a lot of various things like gesture, like these things, they're directly applicable. But what you see a lot of people do when they come from drawing, they might be great at drawing and they go into sculpting, they're used to cheating things, and you can't cheat things in 3D. Not really, not for sculpting. Like for instance, if you're doing a head, you just have to know a lot of things about the bony landmarks of the head. If you're sculpting a form, you just have to know that you have the ulna, you have the radius, and you have the various like pointy bits we talked briefly about before. If you're drawing, you just kind of make it a little bit of a tube and you kind of fill it in because you can cheat it so much. So that's something a lot of people go when they go from drawing to 3D. They realize that they actually have to relearn. Well, not relearn, they have to add things to their arsenal. They might have been good at creating shapes and all that, good at creating gesture, but the specifics of anatomy is something they often don't really have to deal with, which makes sense. It's a different kind of medium. And it might be the same if you go from sculpting to drawing, that you might be adding too much into your drawings, and that's going to destroy the appeal for it. How prevalent are creature artists jobs in larger companies like NPC, DNA, ILM, etc.? This depends quite a lot on what shows they're going. Like for instance, some years ago when I started there at NPC, they had Jungle Book and they had a lot of creature shows at the same time, and they just needed a lot of creature artists. But if they don't have shows like that, for instance, now if they have Lion King as well, you just need to create a lot of animals. But if you don't have that, if you have a lot of Transformers movies and such, they're just going to scale down in terms of that. So it really just depends on it. But it's not like you have like 300 creature artist jobs at each studio or something. There aren't that many jobs available, to be perfectly honest. And also the jobs are a bit more of senior positions, so there aren't that many people who go into a creature or character artist job right away, just because it requires a lot of things. The way you can think about it is, if you have like a pen or something like this, and you mess that up, let's say a character is writing something, a 3D character is writing something, and it's a pen, and you completely mess up that pen. Worst case, it's gonna that pen is not gonna look fantastic. Realistic case, somebody else is just gonna remake it for you. A lot of people can do that. But if you mess up the character who's using the pen, you might be in actual trouble, because it's a complicated thing to do. The pen is you just polymodel it up, you throw some shaders at it, you publish it. It's not that complicated. But the character has so many intertwining things when it comes to the pipeline. It involves some rigging in effects, in all sorts of different things. And it might even be the main character. It might even, the name of the movie might be the character you're working on right now. There are plenty of examples of that, like Godzilla or Riddick and one of these ones. So if you mess that up, it is really, really dangerous. So that means that the company will have to trust you with that task. And that just takes a little bit of time. It takes a little bit of time to get that trust, not just in the sense that they have to trust you and have to pull it off, but you actually have to be able to pull it off as well.
I like that you're one of the examples is Riddick. That's is there like a new Riddick film that came out, or
it came out like some years ago now. That was like a
new
third
one?
Yeah, like a third Riddick film.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not particularly good movies, but they're really like guilty pleasure movies.
What?
I also really enjoyed the game as well.
Anything with Vin Diesel is an instant 10 out of 10. We know that.
Here's a great question. Emilia's saying this from Twitter. For beginners, what software would you recommend for each process in the game dev pipeline? Sculpting, retopo, texturing, etc. So sculpting, ZBrush. Just no doubt about that. ZBrush is the strongest software out there for sculpting. If you have Blender available, everyone will have Blender available. It's free. If you only have Blender available, Blender is going to do a decent job as well. But for like, if you want full control over your shapes, I really do recommend ZBrush for that. So for the next one, retopo. Honestly, most tools can do retopo today. My personal one is actually Maya. I really like Maya for retopology. It gets a bit slow after a while, but Maya is solid. But I just did a course called Character Masterclass in Character Portrait Masterclass, and there we use Blender for it, and that's just full vanilla Blender, no add-ons or anything for that, and that's totally fine as well. You can also use Topogun. Topogun is really, really good as well. All these tools are solid. Something like Topogun is really good if you have a lot of, if you do a lot of arms and legs and such, because then they have like specific tube tools and such as well. But really, most tools can do retopology today. And then for UVs, if you're using Blender, I recommend not using Blender for at least for character stuff. For UVs, I find the UV tools in Blender to be not very good. But then something like Rism, I saw that they actually have a Black Friday sale now as well for that. The Rism is just spelled like that. We have no affiliation with Rism. I just like when people do tools like this.
They pay our salary. That's where we're just shills now. That's what it is.
Just UV tool shills. But yeah, that's a pretty cool one. And then for texture painting, highly recommend Painter. I mean, Painter is just the standard for this. For game dev, it's probably going to be Painter and Designer. And then you have like baking tools. A lot of people use Marmoset for baking. You can also use Painter for baking as well. And then depending on where you put the final asset, that might go straight into something like Unreal or Unity. Or if it's more for a portfolio thing, you might be using this Marmoset for that as well.
I'm thinking he just has an ear hole. He's an alien. They don't have ears apparently. So we'll just give him some sort of ear hole. I feel like that's typically what tends to happen.
It would be pretty funny if you have an alien character like this, which is a fully realistic human ear.
Just like full ears. Saggy lobes and everything.
Here's a question from Ahmed. I bought many courses. Thanks for the amazing resources, but I would like to shed light on a problem. I'm hooked on to watching tons of tutorials and not making my own art. What should I do? Yeah, that's a pretty common issue. Obviously, we make a living selling courses. Courses are useful. Take it with a grain of salt. I have my bias here, so just be aware of that. Courses are fantastic at making you learn something that you're struggling with, or it might be something you don't even know you're struggling with. But end of the day, you need to do work yourself. You just have to spend more time on building things than is to watching courses. I'm a bit more of an advanced artist when it comes to how I watch courses, but the way I do it is that I try to damn this myself to do something, and then once I get stuck, then I look up the issue. This means that I get more of an intuitive understanding of how something works, because it's not just memorizing how something works. It means that I'll work it to the point of failure, and then I'll look something up. And then I'll also look something up in general just to see if there's a smarter way of doing it. But basically, you just have to force yourself to do work yourself, because you are going to learn things from doing courses, but you need to do stuff yourself. I see this all the time with my mentorship, where people who've been watching a specific course, maybe it's like Introduction to Sculpting and such, which is a good course, which covers a lot of concepts. And one of the core concepts there, for instance, is that you need to get bones into your sculpt, like what Morten is doing now. You can see the clavicles and all that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is super important. And then you just make it a note. Okay, I need to have bones to my sculpt. And then they have a little indication of where the bones are on the character. And the problem is you're still not fully understanding it. So what you have to do, you just have to do the work. If you're just being like, okay, I have a note from the tutorial, I have to add bones to my sculpt. Useful, but you need just to drill it a lot. You just have to practice it over and over and over again. So in this case, you just have to sculpt characters over and over and over again, because it's not like you watch one tutorial and now you know exactly how to do that. No, it means you can follow along with different steps, but stuff has to become intuitive to you. It's what we talked about before here with Morten sculpting the anatomy. Like, without I haven't seen Morten stop and look at anatomical resources at this point.
Which I probably should for the forearm. I just want to make that note that anyone who's been watching might have watched me struggle with the forearm. So right now I'm just not. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, forearms are real tricky, and it's definitely useful to have the anatomical reference, but you just have to drill it over and over again. You can simplify it into like kind of two general parts, where one is you're focusing on just a general craft, where you just have to drill things. This is, keep using sports metaphors here, but if you want to do boxing, you just have to do a lot of push-ups. You just have to get strong. If you know all the techniques in boxing, but you're not strong enough, you're going to do all right against like beginners, but you're just not going to get there. So you have to first build strength. And the way you build strength is you just practice. You just practice over and over and over again. And then you also have to just practice techniques in terms of like, you have to do jabs and hooks and all that. And just practice to the point that you can do it without thinking about it, where it just becomes completely a part of your body. It's the same thing here with anatomy, where stuff just becomes entirely second nature. You're like, yeah, stuff is still going to be hard, and you have to practice it, like here with forearms, one of the hardest parts of the body, but at least you can kind of generally get the gist of it. And you're sculpting eyes, you just have to be like, boom, sculpt an eye. You just know exactly how to do it. And then you have the part which is more doing projects, which is like the actual matches. And if you're doing a boxing match or something, you just have to do that as well. You need to do that. This is where you're putting your skills to the real world test. And this is where you're not just practicing it. You're actually combining everything you learned into a final product. Like if you've been sculpting, let's say you've been doing a lot of anatomical studies, and you've now been you're doing what Morten is doing now. You've been doing the upper arm, the forearms, the hands, the back, the head, all that. Cool. Now let's combine it into an alien, where you're using all this knowledge to create something new. And that is like the real test. Ultimately, it's not about the practice. Ultimately, it's about the work you actually produce. Like, it's about the actual alien, but you can't produce the alien without having practiced. That is just really important. Stuff will just have to, you just have to go in and be like, boom, I know how to just do all the things, and then look it up along the way. And it's not like you're not practicing when you're doing the alien. You're learning tons of stuff along the way as well, of course. Like, doing projects is practice by itself. It's like when you're doing the boxing match or the football match, whatever it is you've been practicing for, you will still learn a lot during that. It's just that at that point, kind of the basics should be there, and then what you're learning is more like the fundamental things, like, oh, okay, this is how I can design something in a different way, and this is how I can improve the gesture. But just the various anatomical pieces should really just be something that you know more intuitively, which is really tricky. It just requires a lot of work.
His head shape is interesting to sort of try to get to fit into a more human body and make it look decent, I guess.
Hey, Morten, here's a question for you. Do we have any products on sale?
Yes,
What products do we have for sale?
all of them. Are you looking for something specific?
Maybe you could just bring up a browser or something, show some cool stuff.
I'll bring up some browser cool stuff. Here we go. So, welcome to FlippedNormals. This is our Black Friday sale. 20,000 products, or more than 20,000 products, 50% off currently. That includes our entire library and most of the libraries of all the creators on the store. It's just a shameless plug for our own products here. If you're watching some of the stuff that we're doing today or what we've been doing throughout the week and you want to get started, maybe an introduction to ZBrush is something for you. If you want to get more advanced into things, we have the complete ZBrush bundle, which is great value for money. Or maybe some anatomy for sculptors. I could use a refresher, so I should probably watch this in not too long. I feel like it's always good. This is something that I do, is I'll go back and I'll find resources, especially anatomy resources, and I'll just reuse them. Like if they're, because I always pick up something new, and I get reminded of things that I might have forgotten. Just a little learning pro tip for you there. What else? What's a good... Oh yeah, of course, our Ben Ert course, Advanced Character Creation. This came out not too long ago, and it's quickly becoming one of our most popular products, actually. I mean, Ben just makes amazing art, right? Blizzard artist who knows what he's doing. I think this course is probably it's probably the best presented course that we have. It's just the finish and the detail on it is just it's amazing. He's done an amazing job with his character.
It's really annoying having done my own masterclass right before Ben and having spent so much time doing a solid job on that, and then Ben comes out with his course and it just like, man.
Yeah, it's
I could learn a lot from that guy.
10 out of 10. You know, it's a great course.
Yeah, this is for really advanced people, which is this is something we learned. So we can just briefly talk about that when Morten goes through some cool stuff. Some of the feedback we've been getting, which is something we take very seriously, is to build courses for specific skill levels. It's really easy when you're a beginner to just build courses. You know, you're just showing how to sculpt an alien or something, or sculpting anatomy, but you're not necessarily considering who is watching it. If somebody who's been sculpting for 2 months, or like they're just a complete beginner, they need a completely different course than somebody who's been sculpting for like 6 years. So if you don't consider that, then it's going to be useless for everyone, because then the ones who have been sculpting for 6 years, they're gonna be so bored about the complete beginner stuff, and the ones who've been sculpting for like a month or so, they can't follow anything if you tailor it to the ones who's been doing it for 6 years. So the Ben course is a really advanced one, which is built for people who wants to really learn from like a master like Ben.
Just trying to fix some proportion stuff here. He looks like he's in a cartoon version of Mass Effect because of his massive head. Scale it down a little bit, give him a more heroic sort of distribution in terms of his proportions.
It's a funny one. It's almost a little paradoxical that if you make the head smaller, the person looks taller.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird because they actually become shorter in this sense. Like, your character just became shorter because his head got smaller.
Yeah, that's true.
But he actually looks more proportional. He looks taller.
Well, what I could have done is I could just scale the entire body up. Then it would work. So I don't actually know. Are you seeing me scale the body now, or the head now? So okay.
No, you just scaled like maybe 10 seconds ago or something.
Okay. How is the delay actually today with?
Yeah, I actually don't know because I can't really see what you're sculpting, so I have no idea.
Okay, I just dynamished.
Okay, let's see.
See how long that takes.
Yeah, because Morten are on a live call, but I'm seeing his screen through the stream. Okay, you're dynameshing now.
Oh, wow. Okay. So there's...
Was like half a minute, 30 seconds, no, 20 seconds?
Yeah. Some delay there. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, so honestly, feel free to ask any kind of questions. Industry, topology, what tools should you use? More than happy to answer anything like that. Yeah, just to let people know what's going on with FlippedNormals these days. We've been talking a bit about this in the last few streams, but basically we've been growing faster than we were planning. So we've had issues with the scale of the website. So we've been rebuilding the entire website over the last few years. Last year and a half to almost 2 years. And that's been taking a significant amount of our resources in terms of like we're a very small team, and it's been taking a lot of our resources. So we haven't had time to really build as many courses as we want to, or do challenges, or any of these like really fun things. But they were supposed to deliver maybe in a month. Let's hope so.
Yeah,
and
I hope so.
At least, probably early next year, we should have a new Flashy site, which is in terms of a user experience, it's going to be very similar. It's going to be significantly faster and easier to use. But from you guys' perspective, the cool thing is that we're going to have a lot more capacity to do really cool things like challenges and a lot more YouTube videos. And Morten's going to be freed up from his manacles, which are tying him to his desk now. So that's going to be good.
Dev slavery, which has been for the past... Well, it's been a good few years now, so I'm very excited about that, to be able to focus more on the stuff that's actually fun.
Yeah, building Mass Effect characters on the stream.
Like that. I mean, I'd love to do more of that. Love Mass Effect. I guess at this stage, it's still just... I'm in no rush, as you might be able to tell. So I'm just trying to explore parts of the character. Like I said, I wanted to do more than just the face. So that's why I've been doodling around with all of this to see it because like if you look here, okay, obviously he's a little weird now because he's got one lumpy eye. This tells you part of the story of the character. But once you get to here, that starts to tell you more of a story. Right now, I mean, maybe he's from a cold environment because he's got mittens on or something. Mittens for hands. That was a joke. But in terms of his stature, his build, if he's skinny, that could mean he's one type of character. If he's more built like this guy, he's a different kind. Maybe he's more brute. Maybe he's like a soldier or something. All those things you have to keep in mind when you're creating a character.
Yeah, it's really important to think about the environment and think about the story of the character. That stuff is tricky to get right as well, because I talk about this and then I forget to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It often helps to just have a picture of it. Like when I'm doing like my grungy Dishonored style sculpts, I always find like grungy mug shots.
That's what it was. I was trying to remember that yesterday.
Yeah, that's such cool art direction.
Yeah,
I often find like I try to kind of find the same references they use instead of just looking at Dishonored or looking at the general art you enjoy. Try to find the references they used. And for Dishonored, like I don't know exactly what they used, but they could have used like mug shots from the 1920s. And that's what I've been using for that. I go to Pinterest, look for like antique mug shots, and there are so many interesting characters. You see there. It's interesting because they're all like really short people, just because they had no nutritional value back in like the late 1800s and 1900s, because their height is listed there as well. So they're all like 5'1" and such, whatever that is in metrics, and they're all being called for like stealing apples and
caught for stealing apples,
different things like that.
Damn, it was a different time back then.
Yeah,
I mean now people are they're getting jailed for stealing, firewood and stuff. Because it's so expensive. So maybe not that different, actually.
Why is Morten slightly larger than Henning?
It's just the way it is in life as well.
He's just slightly larger than me.
Wait, it's just real scale. It's
yeah.
Now I'm trying to compensate because the other day I was tiny Morten. Can't have that, right? So now gotta make up for that.
It's yeah, basically like when I've been sculpting, I'm on my computer, and now Morten is on his computer. So it just means that we don't have the exact same setup there.
Yeah, the setup might be slightly different. I think we're still in the same position though, right?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. I gotta say, it's a lot easier to stay focused when you're the one sculpting and not answering questions for 3 days.
Yeah.
I will, but imagine though that once you've been sculpting for 3 days, it's the other way around.
It's quite nice to have a break from it because it's
kind of demanding.
Yeah, sculpting is hard.
It is. So right now he looks like a N64 character with these mittens instead of actual fingers and hands. Like, this is not how I would do it normally. You know, I would just get a base mesh that has hands and fingers, more importantly. Just chuck it in, because then I don't have to worry about all of this. But right now it's just to get the proportions.
Sorry, I almost interrupted you.
Oh,
that was very rude of me. It's hard when we don't have live video, because then it's hard to see exactly when the next person's going to talk.
Yeah.
Because half a minute delay. Here's a good question. What's the best school or university for learning 3D animation? I mean, university or college that has the highest amount of graduates working in the big studios? This is a tricky question, and we dedicated a significant amount of time to education on this channel. This depends on multiple things. Like, for instance, where is it? Like, if you're living in the States or living in Europe, like that's obviously a big thing. You can't just casually just necessarily move continent for that. So if you want something which is local, depends entirely on where you're at, obviously. Second one is cost. If it's the best university in the world, but it's $100,000 a year, and you can't afford that, then it's not the best university in the world for you. So it's about finding something that works for what you want to do. Specifically with costs, this is a pretty major issue, particularly in the States, because universities there are generally significantly more expensive than what you have in Europe. Like, for instance, the one Morten and I attended, that's currently free. That used to cost money. Then there was a little bit of a legal matter for that, and now it's a free university. In the UK, they're around £10,000 a year. I think they increased them a little bit now, so it's around. It's around that. Yeah, it's around that price. So that means that they're not cheap universities, but it means that if you attend one of those universities in the UK and it's a good university, then it's definitely worth the money if the alternative was that you wouldn't get a job otherwise. So some of the good universities in the UK, there are two major ones that are pretty decent. It's the University of Hertfordshire, and then you have the University of Bournemouth. Those are traditionally the ones that have the highest amount of graduates working in the industry. So I can just write that: Uni of Bournemouth and Uni of Hertfordshire. I'm probably spelling Hertfordshire wrong because English is a weird one. But at least those are pretty solid in the UK. Really, you just want to make sure that you're not in debt for life. Like that's like a real thing. If you go to one of the private ones,
that's a pretty big one.
Yeah, it's a pretty big one. There are universities that are $70,000-$80,000 a year, and if you can afford that, that's fine. But if you can get a loan for that, that does not mean you can afford that. If you were to have, let's say, you have 6% interest rate on that loan, which is maybe like $200,000-$300,000 in total, like that is an insane amount of money to pay just in interest per year. So really, really make sure you get the financials sorted before you look into that. So I know this is a bit of a boring question because you just want me to tell you specifically what university you should go to, but you have to consider the financials of it. Otherwise, you're just going to be in actual trouble for that. But then you can check out the list for like the rookies. They have a list as well for the best universities. Just have a look at that, and before you pick a university, check a few things. Check the actual price, so you know exactly how much you're paying. It might be useful to know, well, obviously where it is as well is relevant if you need a visa for that as well. And then talk to graduates, either people who have graduated there recently, who have now got jobs. Like you can find them on LinkedIn. Like if you want to find like graduates from University of Bournemouth, search for University of Bournemouth on LinkedIn and find people there and properly talk to them. Ideally, have a call with them. If not, then just talk to them over email and such, because it's really dangerous if you just trust what they're saying on their websites, because they're trying to sell you something. I'm not anti-university whatsoever. I'm anti-bad university. So you just have to spend a lot of time figuring that out.
That's a great way to put it. Because like university can be great for the right person, if they're really good at that kind of study environment, also with the types of connections that you can get, like the networking that you'll do at university. It won't be for everyone, but it can definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, for me it was great. It was met interesting people. Obviously that's where Morten and I met as well, which is it was obviously creative FlippedNormals as a result of that. But also we learned a lot of different things. But you just have to be sure that it's a solid university beforehand. Yeah, somebody's mentioning Escape Studios as well. I'm looking at them right now. The tuition there is £9,250 per year. So that's, let's see how much that is.
Is Escape like a accredited school now?
I think it is now. I think it was bought or merged or something with this one called Pearson. So I think it is one now where you can do it. But don't take my word for that. Yeah, so that's like $11,000 per year.
That's a lot of tutorials.
It's a lot of tutorials. That's one of the things that is interesting with tutorials, because if you want to, like, I know we talk a lot about characters, that's just our background. If you want to learn character art, if you spend something like $300, you're going to get more training in terms of hours, and you're going to get better training than you will at any university. Like, and that's probably universally true. I don't think there are any universities out there that's going to provide you with better training than well-placed $500 will. And the reason for this is not because universities are bad. It's because universities they have to teach you so many things. Learning everything you need to learn in 3 years is an insane task. And the teachers at universities, either they might be former students, or they might be people who specialize in teaching and they're really good at conveying like core concepts, but they don't necessarily have experience in industry, or they might have experience from the industry, but it might be from a different field. Maybe it's like compositing or lighting, animation, whatever it is. Most likely you're not going to find a character artist who's now become a teacher. Not because that's beneath them or anything. It's just like statistically, there just aren't that many character artists who's been working at a high level in terms of sculpting who's now gone into teaching. Yeah. So it means that if you are getting a course like from FlippedNormals now, you're just going to get that expertise directly into your veins instead of attending university. But a good way of doing that is to attend university, figure out what you want to do, and then buy courses to supplement that. Basically, don't trust the teachers to tell you everything you need to know, just because that's a vast topic and they can't specialize at everything. But then spend a little bit of money on proper courses that you look at reviews and everything for, and then you go from there. So that was a lot about universities, but important topic. If you're looking for universities, that's just one of these things you just have to properly investigate.
Just thinking if I want to add more eyes. I'm kind of leaning towards no, because then I don't have to sculpt it again. But I think I want to experiment. So you can see, like, its proportions are there, right? It's kind of the rough proportions I'm going for. I've slimmed him down a little bit. He's still pretty muscular, right? But he's not as beefy anymore. One of the big changes, fairly small change, but bigger changes I did was I actually moved down all of this to extend his neck to sort of complement this long face and everything, and that elongated the traps a little bit. Before, he was very much sort of scrunched up. That gave him more of a brute kind of look. I feel like moving him down makes him more athletic, and I don't know, seem more intelligent as well. I would say. And one thing that I think I want to try and experiment with is I'll try to open his mouth a little bit and then see if we can get some mouth bag action in there. Very minimal, but have some mouth bag action.
How long does it take to learn basic anatomy? That is a very, very, very interesting question. I have no idea. I have no idea how long it takes to learn basic anatomy, because it depends what you define as basic and what you define as anatomy. For instance, if you want to learn just a pure muscle layout, that's something you can memorize like relatively fast within a few weeks. If you just want to focus on specifically where are the core muscles, where are the bones, and what are the most important names, and where do they generally go. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you actually know how to sculpt. So if the question is how long does it take to get like basic understanding of sculpting, I would say like minimum like a few months of like quite active work on that. Then you can start to like play around with that. So it's really tricky. Once sculpting becomes really fun, once you can start to play with it, that's really the case where you can internalize some of the anatomy. You don't have to look things up all the time, and you're technically decent at ZBrush as well, or whatever sculpting tool you use. If you are struggling with the tool, then it's going to be really hard to become like decent at basic anatomy or anything like that. So it's really important just to become familiar with the tool you're using. And in ZBrush, honestly, it's quite simple to do what Morten is doing now from a technical point of view. Design point of view, it's not simple, but from like just being able to play around with this, you basically need to know how to save and load a tool. You need to know how to use like 3-4 brushes and such. And then you need to know how to use Dynamesh and a few more things here and there, some general hotkeys. But in terms of the actual tool, you're not using that many features. But the getting used to the tool and being able to play with a tool, now that's a bit of a different story. It becoming intuitive, that just takes time. And like Mr. Finnery is saying, it depends on the learner as well. It's not just, there's no such thing as an absolute thing. If you had 2 people from the street, ask them to, you force them to learn anatomy, probably the most pleasant thing in the world, but if you force them to learn anatomy, they would learn anatomy at completely different rates as well, just because people learn in a different way. Yeah. Some people are much more technically leaning towards technical things, and some people are leaning more towards like more artistic things. So yeah, it would be like how hard it would be to learn math. Some people would pick that up faster than other people.
By the way, this is the basics of mouth bags, if anyone's wondering. What I did was I just started pushing polygons into the head, right? Then I isolated it. I enabled double so I could see what I was doing. And if you wanted to make it bigger, then you just start pulling. Expand the space. I mean, you could even go in with inflate and then negative inflate to make a large mouth bag. It's fairly quickly to do. And now it's about trying to rebuild the shapes that we've lost from just destroying our work here.
Here is an interesting question. How relevant is the platform the rookies for landing a job in the industry? Does it make a difference if you make an excellence award, etc., for your career? Let's take away the specifics of like it being rookies or somebody else, and think about it in a more like fundamental way. Like zoom out and what is the most important thing you need in order to get a job. And the most important thing is you need a strong portfolio. There are kind of like 2 things you need to get a job. The first part is you need to be good. You need to just be solid at what you're doing. And then the second part is you need to show people that you're solid, which means that you need good work and you need well-presented work. If you have that, you're going to be in a good spot for getting a job. Now, the rookies or similar competitions and such, they can help get the word out and they can help land your portfolio in the right hands. But if let's say you win an excellence award or something like that, you win the rookies and then you get a job. It's not like you won the rookies and therefore you got a job. It's like, it's just the qualities that made you get the job and made you win the award. They were the same. Your work was excellent, therefore a studio was interested in hiring you, and your work was excellent, therefore you won the award. So focus on the more important things. Like there were a lot of things in the industry like this that, we were judges and the rookies and the sponsors there. Like it's a great competition for sure. And it definitely helps. You can win some cool prizes there. But just focus on the more important things. Don't focus on winning the rookies. Focus on building a really solid portfolio. And that portfolio is the one that's going to be landing your job. And then you, of course, have all the other things like, being a nice person and having your contact info available and all that kind of stuff. But the most important thing is build a solid portfolio, and then everything else becomes secondary. And then you obviously have the soft skills as well. That is just really, really, really important. I'm sure there have been a lot of people with good portfolios that can't get jobs because they're not very nice people to be around. But if you're a nice person, but you don't have the skills, it's just not going to help you. You just need to have the skills as well. Because ultimately, the studio wants to make money on the work you're doing. They have a project and they need to get the project done, and they need to get the project done so that they can make money. And if you can't deliver, then it just doesn't matter what your personality is. You just have to be able to deliver. Just the hard truth is just you just need to have the skills as well.
Fun fact, I actually got my internship through the rookies.
Yeah, same.
So that was pretty beneficial.
But that was also like that ties really well into what I'm talking about. Like both Morten got an internship at the mill and I got one at Framestore. That we already had the skills to do that. Like some months later, we went into jobs in the industry as well, basically with the same portfolios. So with or without that, we still would have been able to get into the field, even though it made it a little bit easier for sure. And I'm sure the guys at the rookies, they're lovely people. I'm sure they're helping a lot of people in the industry as well. Here's a question from SD Canal. Do you think it's possible to become skilled enough to get hired for productions by successfully learning from 20-30 great courses on FlippedNormals? Yes. In terms of the knowledge you need to learn, or in terms of the actual knowledge you need, you can definitely get all the knowledge from that. You just have to be careful that you keep eyes on the price, and the price here is build a great portfolio. Can you build a great portfolio with the knowledge from 20-30 great courses? Absolutely you can. You just have to be sure that you focus on building your portfolio. You focus on getting the skills required for building a portfolio, and then you build the portfolio. But 20-30 courses, like that can be a significant amount of content. Like take the masterclass we released, the one I created, and take the one Ben made. Just there you have like 40 hours of content. That's a significant amount of content. So just there, you're going to get a lot of different things. So in terms of like learning something like a specific skill, like learning all the modeling tools in Maya, that we have a course for that called Introduction to Modeling in Maya. You can learn all that in like 10 hours. Like in one course, you get actually all the tools. And once you know the tools, then you have to actually model a lot. You just have to make sure that if you watch 10 hours of tutorials, that you spend like 100 hours actually modeling.
Yeah.
But that's a cool thing with the world we have today, and with the internet and everything, and with everything being so decentralized like it is now, that you can live in India or Indonesia or wherever it is, and you can get courses and you can learn to the same level as somebody who lives in the UK or California or something like that, because you have access to the same information. I've seen that a lot of times where you have we worked with some absolutely insane people who came from like Thailand and Brazil and all that, and they just learned stuff online, which is really cool. I'm learning anatomy and doing study sculpt in ZBrush. What type of projects do I need to do? Great question. I personally recommend whenever you're learning anatomy, is to learn characters. If you look at the broader picture, do two kinds of projects. One is like pure figure sculpting, which is you try to recreate a human. This might be a human in a pose or just a person in a pose, and you try to do that from a sphere or C-spheres or something like that. Really, really useful to do that. And the reason that's useful is that you properly get to practice a lot of concepts. Like when you're doing like a figure sculpting, you're practicing appeal, gesture, specific anatomy, how to sculpt skin and all that. But then you need to just do anatomical studies as well. Just sit down and just memorize some of the anatomical names. You don't have to do like all several hundred of them. That's just overkill. But learn some of the core ones, and just learn the origin and assertion of some of the larger muscles. Question from Morten. Why do we make a closed mouth, then make the mouth bag, and then close the mouth again?
Well, typically you wouldn't start with the mouth closed, I guess. You would start with the mouth bag, like, so it's there from the beginning, and then close the mouth. All of that in there exists so that we can create a character that can actually open their mouths. When we're sculpting, it's 10 times easier to just not worry about what happens in there, also because then you have to worry about how the lips articulate. And one of the things that are tricky, especially with Dynamesh, is that all this stuff here, like this indication of teeth that we have here, if I remesh now, you can see they start to mesh together, right? So that's something that you have to keep in mind. I need to go to a higher res Dynamesh here in order to actually avoid that.
You can also go, I think there's a setting for it as well. I'm looking for it now. Under Dynamesh, there is one called groups. I think you've enabled that one. I don't think it's going to merge them together.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think, let's see what it is. When pressed, the groups button will split any multi-polygroup Dynamesh into separate pieces. So I think if they're different polygroups, then I think that's going to, but then you can just create odd groups or something.
But split into pieces.
Yeah. Which is better, T-pose or A-pose? The A-pose is infinitely better, I think. And the reason for that is that the T-pose is tricky. Like it's hard to see exactly where the shoulders begin and the shoulders end. It's hard to see where the elbows begin, elbows end, and it's hard to see where the hand begins and ends. So it's much easier to sculpt a character like that for rigging. You might have to maybe turn back to a T-pose for rigging if the riggers prefers that, but I really prefer an A-pose, because otherwise, also the T-pose as well also is like putting a lot of pressure on, or like it's exaggerating the trapezius muscle as well. Like you're really pushing up your trapezius, so like you're up like this. So there's a lot of stuff there, and your scapula is starting to move as well. So I far prefer an A-pose for sculpting, but it also depends not just on your opinion, but it depends on the rigging system you're using. But if you're posing stuff yourself, I prefer to have so you can see the shoulder, you can see where the shoulder begins and end, and you can see where the elbow begins and end, and you can see where the hand begins. So I prefer to have a little bit of a kink in it, like a little bit of a bend in it, so you can see that. Because otherwise, if it's like this, it's hard to see exactly where it begins and ends. But if it's do this, now you can clearly see it. So for instance, if you're rigging, it becomes a million times easier to put the joint in the correct spot. Yeah, Pinka is saying that it's extreme and not natural or neutral. So I think an A-pose is just more neutral. But yeah, again, depends on what your purpose is.
Yeah. I feel like T-poses were very early 2000s. And now more and more it's just A-poses, because it's more natural. You have to do less to remove the muscle tension and the movements in the muscles once you get into rigging.
Yeah, Mr. Finnery is saying that animation-wise, it doesn't really matter if it's slightly bent or not, but it's good for you as a sculptor to indicate where the joint is. And this is exactly my point. Like for rigging, maybe you have to like unbend it later on or make it straighter. Maybe you don't have to. Depends on that. But it's really tricky to place like the elbow in a correct spot and the shoulder in a correct spot if you're properly doing a T-pose. And then you might be in trouble once you start to pose the character, because now you might have to go in and like reshape certain parts there.
All right. Yeah.
It's getting dark so fast now. It's like 3:30 in London, and it's
depressing.
already getting darker. It's just going to get darker and darker for next month. Oh, man. Yeah, it's really cool to see you sculpt, Morten, and I can just kind of relax and well, not really fully relax. I'm drinking a lot more water now than I was the other days. A lot more talking, but it's
Yeah.
a different kind of work. After a long use of a pen tablet, you recommend going for a display tablet? Does it improve all the experience? For me, this is something we were talking about in the other streams as well. It seems to be a pretty common question. A pen tablet is really useful in the sense that it's much more mobile. You can actually bring it with you. It takes up significantly less space on the desk. I think it's better ergonomically because you're not like hunched over and such. But ultimately, with a display tablet, like I have one of those as well. That's actually where I'm reading from right now. I use the second monitor. I sculpt better with it. Like my shapes are more natural, and I have to do fewer undos, and the strokes are generally clearer. So, but it's also quite a lot more expensive. You can get a small Wacom for like $60-$70 or something. Not entirely sure what the smallest ones cost now, but there is definitely not an objective winner when it comes to it. It depends on your situation, depends on how much space you have, and also like ergonomics as well. The display tablet is not fantastic for that, I find. But again, personal preference. Here's a good question from Mike. We can both answer this one, Morten. I'll go first. Here's an open question. What's your biggest moment of realization or learning for you in regards to understanding organic sculpting? For me, I think there might have been two. One might have been the frequencies. You have starts off with like a triangle, trying to not bust it here. You're starting off with like the primary shapes, then you have secondary and tertiary shapes. Just being able to separate it out into that means you have a system for sculpting. So you now know what kind of shapes can be primary, secondary, tertiary, and it just kind of gives some general rules for that. But the other one, which was massive in terms of how I improved my sculpting, was understanding that there are bones underneath everything. That sounds like a stupid one, but it's not really a stupid one because everyone makes some mistakes. But it's not just understanding that there are bones underneath the muscles and everything. That's the core. It's like truly understanding. It's like the more, maybe I don't even truly understand it yet, but the more I learn, the more it's just about the bones, like the gesture that's about the posture, which is about the bone. It changes proportion. It changes so many things. So if you were to have a skeleton that's properly posed up and has the correct proportions, everything, you can add muscles to that with Dynamesh and sorts of stuff, and you would get a really cool character out of that. So if the bones are in a good spot, it becomes much, much easier to sculpt.
Realizations. It's a good question. Maybe like in terms of anatomy, it would be like fat pads and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Realizing that fat pads, gravity, and then that everything affects everything. I think that might actually be the biggest one. So when you move something in your body, that volume that you're moving has to go somewhere else. So like if you're doing any kind of facial features, right? Like if you do a smile, all the skin and fat here gets pushed up. So it's like you always have to displace volume to go somewhere else. It can't just go nowhere. I think that's a pretty big one for me.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that my girlfriend has actually taught me a lot of is when you basically volume stays equals to 1, and if you move it somewhere else, it has to stretch somewhere else. She was doing a lot of blend shapes, and that was like one of the key things there, and that was super useful to me because I hadn't really thought about it like that before. Like if you're doing a smile, putting your cheeks out here, yeah, there is more volume here, but there's less volume somewhere else.
Yeah.
If you put your brows up like this, you look surprised. Yeah, there is more volume here, but there's less volume somewhere else. You do the opposite. You'll be able to frown, more volume here, but less volume up here. Mike also has a really good comment on this as well. He was saying that in the earlier stages for me, learning to think in forms and not lines was vital. That's a really good one as well. Because when you come from, well, not even come from drawing, when you come from not 3D, not sculpting, you don't think about sculpture or character art as forms, as volumes in space. You think about it as just lines which kind of wrap around or something.
Yeah. So I feel like, starting to get somewhere in terms of the kind of character he is, and we can start to understand a little bit more about him. We've got the general shape in there, general volume. Might just play around with his overall silhouette to see if there's anything we can do to make him visually more interesting. Maybe not that.
Do you have any FlippedNormals courses to recommend, Morten, for the Black Friday sale?
Oh yes, I do. 1 sec. There we go. Hey, the banter course. Let's talk about something else. I think one of the things that actually comes up quite a lot is hair in general, and our introduction to XGen, I think, is an excellent way to get started. Hair is one of those elusive subjects that, everyone kind of wants to figure out how to do. It's tricky. XGen in particular is tricky. You have to work in a very specific way, but once you nail that down, XGen is immensely powerful. So that is a great one to check out.
Yeah, Mike, who made the course for us, he's in the chat here. He was the one who was talking about the lines and forms.
Another one, which is something that I could use at some point in this tutorial, is going to be the FlippedNormals eye kit. So the FlippedNormals eye kit, I think, is actually a really cool product. Hand sculpted by an artist, Farid, that we got in to do this. It's a collection of a bunch of different eyes that it's a combination of scan data, manual sculpting, tweaking everything to get the eyes just right. And I don't think there's any other higher quality eye out there on the market right now. They just work. You plop them in, and they look pretty great.
You should see there's some close-ups in the gallery as well, because that's just like insane to see.
I've got this, so you can see like all the strands, all the fibers are sculpted, so they actually have volume. It works quite well in terms of, so this is with subsurface on. Obviously you do lose some detail there, but this is the true detail that you have in the eye. Just looking at it from a standard clay shader, it just elevates your eye game quite a lot. And it's available for, among other things, Marmoset as well, which I think is pretty cool. But Arnold works in Blender as well, Modo and V-Ray. And
it's also made for games and VFX. So there are two custom builds for it, like two completely different builds. One is more real time for it, and one is so that's using like all the parallax cheats and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the ones that is just full on VFX. Very cool. I use this for everything. Like whenever we do a tutorial now and we have a character, we just chuck in the eye kit, because we can't make this from scratch every single time. It would add 2 hours minimum to the to the course, right? And it wouldn't look as good.
It's the same thing with teeth, really.
Yeah.
The guy that I'm sculpting now, he has some teeth. I'm just I have a volume in there, but for like a final thing, I would just chuck in some ready-made teeth. What else? The Weapons Masterclass. That one I think is really, really cool. This is done by an artist called Emil Sleekers, who did a phenomenal job at this, and I think the detail level on this weapon is just amazing. I love this render here. Where is it? This one. Just like a lot of really nice detail. Damage on the edges, fairly accurate assault rifle, I would say. I don't know exactly which type it is because I'm not a gun expert. This render here, I think, is in particular super, super cool. Just a lot of good stuff. Yeah, so remember, 50% off almost all of the products on FlippedNormals, more than 20,000 products, 50% off. It ends on the 29th, on Tuesday, so make sure to pick something up before we wrap up.
Yeah, somebody has a question here about like how do I model like anything in just general. So here is a course I'm putting this in chat, and this is intro to modeling in Maya. It's just an intro to modeling course. It does focus on Maya, but it's really just an intro course to modeling.
Modeling anything, it's actually, you know, that's what your goal should be as a modeler, being able to instinctively model anything. Just the more modeling you do, you get a better and better sense of forms and shapes and how things would actually be built. And obviously that comes with experience. But you know, you see that a lot, especially in the beginning with people. They have questions on how to do very specific things. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it gives you a good sense of how you would build different objects, and you can sort of extrapolate that into building other different objects. But as you get more and more advanced, you, I guess, create a more intuitive sense of just what an object would look like.
There's a question here, which we talked about this briefly on the first stream I think we had this week. Action versus the Blender hair system, and Mike actually has a good answer to this. The difference between them is still pretty large, but given that X-Gen development is dead, it's only a matter of time before Blender catches up. Might take a while though. Hair is hard. Yeah. To add to that, the hair system in Blender is incredibly early in its development, like the new one in 3.3. It has a lot of potential. But something I see with the development or the community of Blender is that people see that something's being worked on, and then they assume that it's that it's the same quality as the competition. So that's not great, right? Like geometry nodes are being added, then it's going to be the same as Houdini in a few years. It doesn't mean that. Just because it's going towards that goal does not mean that it will end up at that spot. It was the same thing with like a few years ago now, maybe 3 years ago, when Pablo was working on the sculpting tools. It was like, every single week there's a new update to the sculpting tools. Given if this level of development continues, in 3 years it's going to be the level of ZBrush. 3 years later, it's not the level of ZBrush. So same thing with hair tools. They're being actively worked on at the moment in Blender, but that does not mean that they're going to keep that trajectory going. It means that in 3 years, maybe they were just a little bit more sophisticated. Maybe they went like, well, actually, you can just develop your own hair nodes or your geometry nodes for the hair system now. And that's fine. It's in the community's hands now. So we just have to see, because if it doesn't get further updates, it's going to be very, very, very far away from where X-Gen is. A tool you probably want to look into though is actually Houdini for hair. That seems to be where a lot of people are going.
Oh yeah,
my girlfriend is nodding pleasantly at me. Houdini is just a tool that everyone is going towards now.
I think something that's important to keep in mind for Blender. So for me, you know, I'm rooting for Blender. I want all the success for Blender. So. But it seems like the general, and I could be wrong, I'm not on the dev team or, you know, involved with Blender in any way, but it seems like the priority is to add features and then get it up to a certain point, maybe like 60-70%, and then move on. So you never really get to that ultra finished, polished product. I could be wrong, but that's sort of the trend that I'm seeing. They add really cool features, and then not a lot tends to happen with it down the line.
Yeah, Mike is saying here he's basically mimicking that, what you're saying here. Getting 50% is like quote unquote easy, but it gets harder and harder, and that's exactly what we're seeing with like the sculpting tools. It was getting to like maybe like the 70% mark, and then it was just dropped. Now, if that was because Pablo left, I mean he did leave, so but nobody picked it up, and maybe that it only happened because he initially picked it up. But regardless, it was taken up to a certain spot, and then it was like, okay, cool. That's kind of it now. And then now we're seeing incremental changes in that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we see this a lot in Blender. Blender feels very open sourcey in a sense, like where, not just in a sense, it feels very, very open sourcey with a lot of these kind of things. It's really cool though, because it does mean that yay, new hair system, and it's a very nice foundation for it. But that kind of stuff will just have to be worked on in the future as well.
It's cool though, because it promotes like development of a lot of really cool things that you might not see elsewhere. But in terms of just pure competition with other pieces of software, that's where it can fall short. And that's also okay. I mean, I think maybe that's the problem for a lot of people in terms of their assumptions or expectations for Blender, is that it has to be the end-all be-all software, but it doesn't. We have specialized software for other things for a reason, you know. And I don't know, to be honest, you kind of want that, because then you know that development for that is specifically targeted, and it's going to be the best it can be for the specific job that it's designed for.
I personally don't think it would be good for Blender as a whole if it tried to compete with Houdini, for instance, because it would mean that they would have like one developer working on geometry nodes and be like, cool, now it's Houdini. It would mean that they would have to spend basically all the resources on that. They would have to spend a significant amount of resources trying to become Houdini, and then other things like Grease Pencil and a lot of the other like things to have like Eevee and a lot of things that make Blender unique would not get developed. So I think specializing in something like that is not necessarily the best way of doing it. Let Houdini do effects. You know, if you want effects, do that, and then you can use Blender as a tool where you can do a lot of different things. But you can't necessarily take it up to 100. Yeah, you can do some texture painting in there, but if you want to proper texture paint, use Mario or use Painter. You can do a lot of sculpting, but if you want to take it to 100%, use ZBrush. You can do some effect stuff there, but if you want to take it to 100, use Houdini. But it means that in one package, you have something that you can use to do a lot of different things. But if you want the highest level, you need specialized software.
And that's
what you're
really
seeing.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, that's a fantastic way of doing it. Like exactly what Mike was saying before, like getting to 50% is easy, but then it gets progressively harder. If you want to like take over Houdini, it's not like you just add an update or like a patch to it and now you're there. Like Houdini has been in active development for like a very, very long time now. And there's constant updates to it. So you're already like 20 years behind on that. So it's going to be impossible to catch up to those players. And I don't think that's even a good idea.
I just saw Finnery say Morten is sculpting the alien who designed the ZBrush UI. Yeah, that is correct.
That is correct.
Goddamn protheans.
Also, in the chat, I'm just going to spell your name.
Oh, yeah. Morten, Morgan, you know. Oh, that's funny.
So there we go. Now, this is the spelling.
Oh, I thought... I just saw your name to begin with. This is how you spell Morten. Henning.
Yes. Yeah, here's a good comment. You should make a playlist, but for courses, like it would contain a certain amount of courses that will prepare us for production from beginner to industry ready. Yeah, that's something we have been talking about. We haven't had time to really do that because it's something you have to really think about. It's not just the order of the courses. It's also like if you have a path there, some kind of learning path, you have to also make courses that fits within that path. But if let's say you were to have a proper path like that, could have that as a standalone product as well, where you just subscribe to that path. But yeah, it's not something we're doing right now. But putting the courses in order is not a bad idea at all. Now everyone is misspelling your name, Morten, in the comments.
Smorgan, Molen. That's a good one.
A production workflow sounds cool. I'll actually going to leave a link to a course here. This is one we made recently. It's called let's see if it comes realistic character portrait masterclass. Bit of a mouthful there, where it does cover a lot of things for production. It basically covers how to make a whole bust from start to finish. This is something we spent a significant amount of time developing. So I hope you guys will like this one. This one really goes through everything start to finish. Like everything in the final render is shown in real time from like you see the link in the chat here. It's shown in real time from the first model in Blender to importing this into ZBrush for sculpting and then continuing there, UV mapping, texture painting it, and rendering in Blender. This is actually one of the first times I've seen skin shading properly addressed in a tutorial, and I really want to do a YouTube video on that as well. I was going to do that before Black Friday, but then didn't have time for that. But I really want to like basically make a free video of that as well, because skin shading is such an important topic, and people tend to get skin shading wrong. It's not that hard once you know what to look for, but the problem is you're not just going to intuitively know what to look for. So you can do really cool skin shading within like Blender or an Arnold or anything like that, just with default shaders. What's your preferred renderers? My preferred renderer is, well, it depends really from day to day. I keep going between Cycles and Arnold. Arnold, I think, is a better render engine. I think it's a more refined product. And with the, you have more material nodes there, and like the skin shading is nicer there, like the subsurface scattering is nicer. But it's slow. It means you can throw anything at Arnold, but it's not a particularly fast renderer. While in Cycles, I find that it to be significantly faster. So for instance, a lot of the product shots we just do that straight up in Cycles. Sometimes we even do it in Eevee as well, just because it works really well. So for, we'd still do a fair bit of 3D in FlippedNormals, right? Morten is sculpting now, and if we do turn into tutorials, then we have to do nice product shots. And for that, we use Blender for all of it, particularly when it's GPU based, like in how Cycles is really good at GPU rendering. It's really fast.
Yeah, for me, it's 100% Cycles. I love that engine, GPU-wise. It's just so fast, and it covers all of my needs, the needs that I have now, at least.
Emil is saying, hey. Well, hey, Emil. Emil is Fast Track Tutorials. So you guys should check out Fast Track Tutorials as well. They're producing really, really, really good and a lot of environmental courses, but also like general prop modeling as well. So so check those out. I'll leave a link to Fast Track in the comments here.
I was just gonna do that. Anyway, I'll show it on the marketplace. Might as well. Emil's got a lot of really, really cool courses, very environment focused. A lot of cool stuff. This large scale environment creation here. Just look at that. It's like being in Rome. I'm assuming it's Rome. No, but Emil has a great teaching style. Like we said, he also did the masterclass, the weapons masterclass for us. He's done a bunch of other courses, and then he has his own store as well, where he sells a lot of really cool products. So definitely check them out. Also, 50% off.
Yeah, his stuff is fantastic. If you're looking to do environmental work, Emil's course is probably one of the best resources you can have. Have you used Octane? Nope, but I heard really good things about Octane. It looks like it's probably one of those ones I would have got into if Cycles wasn't at the level where Cycles is. Like if I was doing like a lot of professional level client work, I would probably be looking into Octane. One of the best things about a comment here, one of the best things about sculpting in Blender versus ZBrush is using Eevee while sculpting now. I wish ZBrush would do something like that. Totally agree. Like currently you can see like, it looks all right what Morten's doing in terms of like the matte cap, but it's also like limiting in what you can actually, what data you can get, because you don't really have like bounce light or anything like that. It's just a matte cap. But if you actually sculpting in Blender, now you aren't really restricted to even Eevee. You can also use Cycles, just switch the viewport to Cycles, and then you obviously can't sculpt in real time, but you can still see it in real time. You can still see the result, and this just means you get very close to what it's going to look like in the final render. While in ZBrush, you really don't know exactly what it looks like. So I tend to do tons of test renders, and this is again one of the advantages of Blender, that it's way more iterative in that sense. Can your new 3D course help with creating a knight armor? If you're asking that, then I don't think that course is right for you. I assume that's the Banter course, and the reason for that is that course is like if you need to make something specific and you need a course for that, then I don't think you're at the advanced level required for Ben's course, because that's a very advanced course, to be honest. And it's more like taking a workflow up to the next level. For something highly specific, you need something more like intermediate. Yeah, it's interesting when they were like there is a Justin is saying that there is a Blender Octane version. And
okay.
it's like that's really cool. It's just tricky with all the software. Like there is just a lot of. He's also saying it's free for personal commercial use. Didn't know that.
Okay, cool.
There is just a lot of software to pick up and learn, and there are only so many hours in the day. And
yeah, it's very true.
Yeah, it's really hard to be like, let's just pick up Octane. Probably a good idea, but my God, there's so much to learn. Yeah, it's really cool seeing the sculpt coming to life.
Slowly getting there. Probably won't stream for too much longer, but we got part of the way there. Usually the way I work is I would never work for this long, like on a thing. It also means that I tend to lose focus a little bit, and I end up in the noodling territory, which you might be able to see. But so usually what I'll do if I'm working on something like this, and after an hour or so, I'll step away and I'll look at finding some more references, try to analyze what I've done, and see if do I like the work, what can be improved. So if I do another stream, which I think I'll do, I might actually just continue on this guy here and see how we can make him better.
Here's the interesting question. We did briefly talk about this a bit before. Is studying drawing a good to sculpting in 3D? I guess you mean is it a good idea to sculpt? Will drawing help you sculpt in 3D? Like, yeah, it will help if you focus on the right things. If you just do a portrait of like a celebrity and you try to recreate that with a grid or something, probably not a whole lot. And if you're just doing like simple like photo studies like that, I don't think that's going to help a crazy amount. But if you try to sculpt or draw, like you try to construct volumes from imagination, you try to understand volume and appealing shapes and anatomy, very, very much so. Very useful. Here's one for you, Morten. Is sort of above here now. Is cycles limiting for hyper realistic shots or renders, or can you use it more for stylized work?
Oh yeah, you can 100% use it for stylized work as well, because it works with all of the nodes in Blender, and with nodes you're able to do practically anything you want. So there are a lot of really cool stylized shaders out there. Like I saw someone's working on this really customizable cartoon anime shader maybe a couple months back. I have no way of finding it, but maybe search for like anime shader in Blender, that kind of stuff. So it's really limitless.
Yeah, that's often what you're seeing as well. Same with like Arnold as well. You can still use it for all sorts of stuff, even non-photorealistic stuff like NPR renders and such. Yeah, what Mike is saying here is spot on in terms of drawing. Drawing is two big transferable skills for 3D, in my opinion. Understanding of shape language and observational skills. Observational skills is one of these things that is just important. It's one of these things when I was learning 3D, I think it was like 16, 17, and I kept doing 3D and drawing at the same time. And whenever I would draw, I'm going to draw for like a month, and then I might do 3D for a month. Whenever I would draw, I noticed my 3D was getting better. Whenever I do 3D, my drawing would get better. I was like, what's going on here? Didn't get that. That took a while to understand. I just knew I was getting better. I was getting better at 3D, but I hadn't done any 3D. That doesn't make any sense. But it does make sense if you consider that in this case, I wasn't really doing like volume and shape and such. Like I was still doing like portraits. So I know a lot of live portrait, but from photos. So you don't really think about depth in the same way then. But it meant that I got much better observing, because observation was still a thing I had to do. So by getting better at observation, my 3D was getting better, even though I didn't do any 3D. And the good news there is that you don't necessarily just have to do that in drawing. You can do that just if you're sitting on a bus. You can just observe people. You can just notice specific things, like notice somebody's weird eye or their haircut or how tall or short somebody is, all these kind of things. Notice their costume, well, the clothes they're wearing rather. So you can do all sorts of cool stuff just with observation. Like it's one of the ways to never get bored as well. It's just to observe and not just like look casually around, but like analytically look at something. Like if you're learning sculpting, you know that we have bones, muscle, fat, skin. You can just do that. Look at somebody on a bus on the underground or whatever, and just analyze the bone, look at the fat, look at the skin, look at the muscle, and just analyze that. So it means that you will get quite a lot better at 3D by not doing 3D, but it doesn't mean that you have to draw for that. You can do that just in. You can even do like crappy drawings. You're kind of just looking at them, and at the same time you're just drawing on the pen or with the pen just to like get it down on paper. But it doesn't mean the end output will have to be good. I hope that makes sense.
I think something that I noticed as well in terms of getting better was when I took breaks. You know, maybe I would have like intense periods for a few weeks where I would just model and sculpt and do stuff, and then I would take a break for a couple of days. Maybe I'd take a break for a week. And then when I returned to 3D, I would be able to understand things that I wasn't able to understand before for whatever reason. So I think subconsciously your mind does stuff. It internalizes things that you're not really aware of, and that helps you become better as well.
Yeah, it's almost like all the knowledge settles a little bit and you get to internalize it. I think that's really helpful. Here's a good question. Is modeling very different in Blender versus 3ds Max or Maya, or is modeling pretty much the same in every software? Yeah, this is a very good question. Fundamentally, it's all the same. Like you can export a model from Blender and import it directly into Maya and Max. It's all just points in space, right? So it's all really the same, but the interface is different, and exactly how you do it is a bit different. So really, it's the interface is different, but end of the day, you're dealing with polygons. You're dealing with basically triangles under the hood. So quite similar. Meaning that it's all a foundational skill. Like 3D modeling is just a foundational skill that you can apply to in any software. You might have there are some different things if you're trying to do like procedural modeling, like with geometry nodes or in Houdini or something like that, because then it's a bit of a different way of thinking about it. But just pure polygonal modeling, it's just the same thing. You might be called something else in different software. Maybe a sphere is called a ball or something, but it's just the same thing. So it meant that, for instance, when I was learning Maya, like years ago, like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I came from using Modo, and I was already modeling a lot in Modo. But getting into Maya was kind of easy because it's just, all right, cool, where's my extrude tool? Where's my edge extend tool? Oh, it's not called edge extend, it's called extrude here as well, extrude edge. Cool, learn that. How do I scale? Oh, different hotkey, fine. It takes a little bit of time to get used to just differences in hotkeys as well, but that's just a thing your brain will have to get used to. That is also one of the most frustrating things about learning a new software, is that it takes you quite a while, maybe a few weeks at least, depending on how fast you are at it or how much time you have available. If you go from like Maya to Blender or the opposite, you can do it. You can do a certain thing in the software you came from, but it takes a long while for you to be able to do that in the new software, and it's so frustrating. It's like trying to cut bread with a brick or something. It's just like it just doesn't work, even though if you had the right tool for it, you were able to do it.
Again, just tweaking some things. This is not a word, but I wanted to athleticize the body, make it a little more slim and extend the torso down. Again, just to give me a little more background on who this guy actually is. And we'll sort of reattach his arm because it got messed up in the process.
Here's a product. I'm going to show this in the chat. This is called FlippedNormals Anatomy Bust. This is a really, really, really cool product. This is like $12 now, so it's quite affordable. This is what I used for the streams. The streams I did. Morten has been using it, but this is what I've been using, and it's a really solid tool for just like sculpting faces and such. So a lot of people were asking about this over the last few days, where I got that from, and this is like one we made ourselves. Yeah, here's a comment. Going from Blender to Maya is okay, but going from it to ZBrush is a new world. And yeah, I mean, going to ZBrush is just a weird one because Blender has a bit of an open source UX. Stuff isn't like super tight necessarily, but it's still manageable. Like it still adheres to logical principles. It's just a bit Alkotti based, for instance, a bit of a personal preference. But ZBrush doesn't adhere to principles. Like that's one of the weird things about it. Like we talked about this in one of my streams, that in the menus, they're alphabetical. If you notice in Morten's stream now, if you were to just look at the menus up at the top, it says alpha, brush, color, document. That's A, B, C, D. And then edit, E, and then it's like L, and like it's why Logic. Is it alphabetical? Like that's not using UX concepts. That's just kind of doing their own thing. So going to ZBrush is a bit of a weird one. And also, like, how do you save in Blender? Well, easy. You just kind of Control S, fine. How do you save in Maya? Control S, Max, Control S. How do you save in ZBrush? Control S, yes, but now you have to know a lot of things. So it's really, really tricky. Basically, the problem I have with ZBrush in terms of UX is that you have to memorize a lot of things. While in something like Mudbox, you don't have to memorize. You just have to understand how it is. Some memory here and there required, of course, but generally, it's a lot more straightforward. So in ZBrush, the problem is if you have to memorize things for it to work, that means you forget things when you aren't using it. Yeah. So if you haven't used ZBrush for a few months and you go back into it, you're like, how the hell does this thing even operate? Here's a good question from Rui. As a beginner to sculpt a human head, I'm struggling to achieve likeness of the character I'm sculpting. How should I practice? Morten, what do you think about likeness? How do you achieve likeness?
I don't, because it's too hard. I'm terrible at likeness, actually. It's one of those things that my wife is amazing at likeness. And she's really great at analyzing. And so she's been sort of teaching me over the years what her approach has been for it. It's like, at least that's sort of in an analytical way. There's probably other ways. Like I said, I don't really do likeness because it's really hard. But it's figuring out the relationships between things. So like now, for example, when I'm doing this prothean guy, let's pretend this is a likeness sculpt, because I guess it kind of is, right? Let's see here. So this dude here, right? So it's sort of like thinking about the relationships between things, if we look at this nostril, I suppose, right? If you wanted to make it more like him, we can see, okay, the distance between the center line out is probably okay, but we need to push it out further. His face would be more like a V instead of going straight up. The eye there needs to be bigger. This part here needs to come down. Maybe we tilt his head. So analyzing those relationships in terms of the distances between things is probably what I would say. But again, I don't do likeness sculpt, so maybe my advice isn't the best there.
Likeness is so tricky, because this is something we talked about in my stream, that there are kind of two things you have to achieve in order for a sculpt to look appealing. You need the anatomy to be solid. Like that's just stuff just needs to be there. If the scalpel is in the wrong spot, well, then the arm is in the wrong spot and everything looks wrong. If the proportions of the rib cage is wrong, everything is going to look wrong. So the anatomy, the premuscles, the bone, the fat pads, all that will just have to be solid. On top of that, you need design as well. This is where you're talking about the costume, you're talking about the specific proportions of something. And that is really tricky. So it's not just making it look like a kind of a person. Let's say you're sculpting like Brad Pitt. It's not just first you have to make it feel like a generic human. It needs to feel like this exists in the world, and the anatomy needs to be solid. And then on top of that, now you have to design it so it looks like Brad Pitt with all the weirdness going on in that face, in terms of like you have to get in all the idiosyncrasies, the asymmetry, all the pores and wrinkles will have to be there, the proportions. That is tricky. And the hard thing about that is not just looking at a photo and doing it. It's that you don't have good data. If you had a scan of Brad Pitt, you could do that not easily, but it would be a lot easier to do, because now you could at least have good reference. The problem is you're not going to find good reference. You're going to find probably a lot of blurry photos where he might be wearing makeup and the lighting is soft or it's way too hard. And the focal length of the camera being used, or lens being used, is going to be different from every single shot. So likeness is inherently a really annoying and really hard thing to do, unless you're Vimal. Then like Vimal is just a complete genius at likeness. But unless you're a Vimal, then your likeness is really, really tricky. And the smallest thing is going to like destroy the likeness. It might be the angle of the eye is a few degrees off, or slight proportional issues are just present, and you can be like, I see what they're trying to do, but it's just not fully there. So one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of likeness is just it just takes so much time, and it's like very fiddly work in the sense that you really just have to observe the person to like down to a very fine level of detail.
I guess also just something that I've never really practiced it. You know, I've tried a few times, and the challenge, I guess, has never been fun for me. Whereas creating something else has always caught my attention more. So, yeah, I just never really got hooked on it. Maybe I could do it. I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah, sure, I could do like the sculpts because I've never really done them, right? But I can sculpt most other things. So I would assume that with enough time, I could probably make something work.
Yeah, I think it's a skill like anything else. In a sense, you do have to be excellent at sculpting a face, because if the proportions are correct based on the likeness, but the underlying anatomy is wrong, it's gonna feel wrong. I think that's why somebody like Vimal, I just posted a link to his portfolio, is why his work is so solid. It's because he's an absolute excellent sculptor. We worked together at DNEG, and he just kicked my ass. It's glorious. And then and then he's just really, really good at like pure likeness as well.
Okay.
Yes, somebody was saying before as well that we should do more of these streams, and yeah, I would really like to. It's something we were talking about, like maybe like over New Year or something. If Morten is out of absolute development hell, that is something we can do like more regularly.
Yeah.
Because that would be tons of fun. But yeah, we just have to see. We are a very small team, and we are running a pretty scary website in terms of complexity. So
yeah. One thing I just wanted to point out real quick here about the delts. If you look at it from before, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to save this project. So you know, if it crashes, we don't lose all the progress. Let's just do that quick. And then we can quickly just go back in the undo history and see where we're at. And because I want to point something out about the shoulders here. So trying to get a more naturalistic shoulder position and shoulder shape. You could see how it's very vertical now with like a little lip up here, whereas in the beginning, okay, let's see if we can do this without things crashing. We just go back here.
At least you saved. I didn't save any of my streams. Yesterday's streams after you left just crashed afterwards. So
that's a shame.
Yeah.
So let's go here. Let's do that. I think that's a good point to do it from. And then we'll go here. We'll do another one. And then here, we'll go back to where we are now. Let's see. Come on. Okay, there we go. So if we look at this guy, let's have a look. So these are this was in the beginning, right? Where he's a lot more blobby than he is now. Now he's more streamlined and he's more slim, I suppose. So if we go through time here, you can see how, especially the shoulders, how I've lowered them and I've pulled this part in to make it more flat here and make this thing poke out less. So here it was much more like, it was almost like a 45-degree angle, and it was only really one shape, which made the delts look very unnatural. And here I sort of created a plateau at the top. So like delts going up and the delts going in. I think that makes a huge difference for delts. For me, anatomy is like this iterative process where it'll just look weird in the beginning. I'm not the best sculptor at nailing the shape from the get-go. I sort of have to work through it a lot. And so I'm just a little bit slower because of that. But eventually I'll get there. And that's sort of the same thing that's happened with the shoulder. And I think one of the other big changes is just taking out some of that ballooning in the shape in general. You can see how everything is almost like the same. It's very bulbous, very volumetric. It's just creating some relief for your eyes here, like pushing in where the biceps sort of terminates and where the forearms they start. Well, we've taken this part here, this part, and sort of moved it in, right? You could even do that some more, bringing it closer to the body to create a little more contrast. And
that's really cool. I haven't thought about that with Delta before, but like adding the plane to it. That's really nice.
I think it. I mean, you can see it makes a big difference, right?
Yeah, it really does.
And same thing with the traps. This is something that I mentioned as well. Here, the traps again, it sort of extends that 45-degree angle, which makes it look a little bit unnatural. Here, instead, we'll make one plane change, we'll make another plane change, and then another one. My Epic Pen thing isn't set up yet, so I can't really draw on the screen, I think. Let's see.
That is one of the coolest tools I know I've been starting to use recently. I can't see your screen in real time, but Epic Pen is just transformed how I teach.
Yeah.
Like in terms of notes, it's really good.
So I can't remember any of my hotkeys, but whatever. Let's just do this real quick. Yay. Okay, so, we've got your traps here, and then technically there's a plane there, and a plane there, but I'm trying to simplify this. So we're breaking it into that, whereas before it was more just like one round shape, and this helps you break up the silhouette, and it just looks more natural that way. I think one of the other big things here is when we slim this down, we actually keep the chest part quite big to have him be quite large up there. So that helps bring focus there. We scale down the face quite a lot, or the entire head, and then elongated, the entire body here. And like I said, I like to add these parts, even though it takes longer, because it helps me understand the character even more. So let's see here. Go through time again, so that's like the in-between step. So if we just jump directly from one to the other, you can see there, elongating the body definitely helped more, made him more athletic and less like a brute.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you have any other cool anatomy tips like that?
Probably. Oh yeah, actually we can now, speaking of traps, I think this one is a good one for people to know. So you can see this has sort of been the approach. This part in here, this triangle shape, I feel like that nailing this shape is a great way to making the sternocleidomastoid and the traps come together in a better way. Oftentimes, as when people do anatomy, I'll see this whole thing sort of flow together, and you become it's a very thick neck. It's kind of unrealistic. So what you'll actually have is in here, you'll actually have this almost triangle shape of a gap, you know, where there's like not the same kind of muscle, I suppose. And then you'll have the traps go up here, and then let's pretend that there's an ear and like a sternocleidomastoid, a little mastoid process behind the ear here. That'll go down sort of there. And then this part here will just form this empty triangle where everything else lives on top of. And I think this helps sell it a lot more. You find that same triangle, type of triangle, down here actually. Right here. You'll have like this, not that big, but you'll have this vacuum where there's a gap between the delts and the pecs right there. So getting those two in, they're almost like symmetrical triangles there, really helps sell that upper body look.
I found it to be helpful to think about it as basically the traps, they go into the clavicles, and then the deltoid basically goes from the same point. There's almost like a line. You actually have that on a sculpt. Maybe it's like 20 seconds in the future, but there's basically like a line from where the traps go into the delt. That was something I learned like just a few weeks ago when I was just learning some more anatomy.
That's the thing. There's like it's a never-ending thing, right? You can never I don't know, like you can never master anatomy. There's just too much to learn. So
yeah, no, it's true. It's a never-ending thing. You always can go one level deeper.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be it for me. Obviously, it's going to be hard for Henning to stay on, seeing as I control the stream today. But
yeah, I think that's it for us.
Do you have anything you want to add, Henning?
Yeah, make sure to check out the FlippedNormals marketplace. Everything is 50% off during the Black Friday sale. We have tons of really cool courses. We have Bernard's new course. We have the masterclass I did. We have the eye kit. We have the face kit with tons of really cool products. If you haven't checked out the store for a while, like this year, we've actually got out a lot of new, really cool things. So 50% off on nearly all products. Every single FlippedNormals exclusive is half price now. We really have some of the best character art courses and resources out there, I think, in terms of like the scope of them and such. So we spend a lot of time on these courses, and I really think they're going to help you if you're particularly interested in sculpting, or like if you want to get like high frequency details on your face and all that. So yeah, I think that's basically the last thing from me. We're definitely going to be back sculpting tomorrow as well. Tomorrow is the Black Friday, so we're going to be doing a lot of cool sculpting tomorrow. I guess Morten is going to continue his little alien tomorrow. Then I might be doing some more sculpting later on as well. So yeah, stay tuned for that. A lot more to come. We're probably halfway through our streaming schedule for this week. It's going to be quite intense, but yeah, a bunch of more stuff coming from us soon. So yeah, that's it.
All right. See you guys later, and thank you so much for tuning in. Yay.